After years of fits and starts, the big money on Wall Street finally throwing its weight behind diversity in corporate boardrooms. BlackRock, Vanguard and State Street are all embracing shareholder proposals to add more women and minorities to boards. How it's coming together is the subject of the latest installment in a 2-week series from Bloomberg News called The Future of Investing, and I would urge everyone to check out all of the stories in that series. Peggy Collins is head of our US investing team. Ironic to go from one news item to this news item, but talk to us about how this is faring, because it feels like this discussion has been had over and over and over again. Are we getting anywhere?
That's right, Bonnie. It does feel like, in a lot of ways, as we just talked about it, the momentum is picking up in terms of traction for diversity proposals that shareholders have. One of the reasons why is the big weight on Wall Street, the passive investors, the ETF providers, BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, as you mentioned, who for a long time were saying, hey, we're passive investors. Like, we're owning shares of lots of different companies across the U.S. because they're part of an index, they're part of a benchmark. We're not like the active mutual fund managers of old days who could pick one stock like an IBM or an Apple and pressure the company by saying, hey, I'm going to drop your stock out of my mutual fund if you don't add women to the board. For passive investors, that's been a little bit trickier, and they've sat on the sidelines a little bit in trying to figure out how to be activists while they're really a passive investor. But we're seeing a lot more momentum from the big three that you mentioned, who are actually really, in some cases, voting with shareholder proposals, and more pressuring companies' management to say, hey, if you have an all-male board, you really need to think about adding women and minorities to it, and in some cases are really having success at that pressure and turning companies around.
Peggy, the motivation, it isn't entirely altruistic, is it?
That's right. Essentially, what we're finding in our reporting is that one of the big drivers is the fact that these companies are really looking to the future. And what's in the future? It's younger investors, millennials, and it's also women. And what they're finding is that millennials are really paying more and more attention to what people call ESG. That's environmental, social, and governance factors. And so they're looking at companies and the stocks or indexes that they own and saying, hey, what's the governance here? Are there minorities on the board? Are there women on the board? So companies are trying to sell products and want to be able to fall under that ESG criteria. So that's one of the reasons. The other reason is that there are studies finding that if you have a more diverse board, it leads to more profits at the business. So there's actually a business argument to be made that companies should be shifting to more diversity because it will be better for shareholders. So those are two of the things that are really gaining traction and pushing some of the investors, the biggest investors on Wall Street, to in turn pressure companies to diversify their boards.